Assalamu alaikum, I'm Carl Arundel and you're watching In Focus. Now I'm delighted to be joined today by the Right Honourable Nick Clegg MP, the Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Democrat Party. Assalamu alaikum, Nick, and welcome again to Islam Channel.
Very good to be with you.
Now you have this week written, should I say, an unsolicited letter to the Muslim Council of Britain, following what you refer to as the recent developments in schools in Birmingham and the widespread commentary about the role of Muslims in public life. In the letter you state that, and I'm quoting you, it was fundamentally wrong for British citizens who hold the Islamic faith to be held to a different or indeed higher standard from other citizens. Being Muslim does not contradict being British, nor is it in tension with it. A person can uphold their religious and cultural identity as well as British identity. Now, I've spoken to the MCB earlier today, and they warmly welcomed your comments. Do you accept, therefore, that there seems to be a double standard being applied to the Muslim community, both within the media and by senior politicians? Was the Prime Minister correct to start a debate about British values?
Well, I think in the wake of the controversy surrounding the events and the reports into the schools in Birmingham, this has clearly led to a debate, much of which is reasonable and balanced, but some of which I think has provoked real anxiety amongst law-abiding, mainstream British Muslims who are as British as anybody else, who are as patriotic as anybody else. And I think it's terrifically important that at a time like this, we don't allow some of the polarised rhetoric to typecast all British Muslims. I think that would be a deeply...
So was the Prime Minister misguided to start this debate on British values?
No, I know many British Muslims who feel as strongly about the need to uphold British values of tolerance, of equality before the law, of the value of democracy, as much as anybody else, of people of other faiths and none. So there's nothing wrong with having a debate about British values. After all, no community can survive without values, and it is important that we do recognise that there are values that bring us together. But I think that it would be spectacularly self-defeating and just wrong and unfair if an impression was ever given in the way in which, somewhat hyperbolic way in which these things, the slightly sort of breathless way that these things can be reported and described, to allow any suggestion to enter into the debate that somehow, if you're a British Muslim, you are by definition going to be less British than anybody else. I think that is unfair. That's unfair on the many British Muslims that serve in our armed forces. In fact, there's been a quite sharp increase, which I think I really welcome, over the last several years, a 40% increase of the number of British Muslims serving in the armed forces compared to some years ago. And there are so many British Muslims who volunteer in their communities, who work hard for their communities, whether they are communities that are predominantly Muslim communities or not. And I think it's very important we celebrate the contribution of British Muslims to the fabric of British life, because of course at the end of the day it is British Muslims who believe in those values of tolerance, of diversity, of equality before the law, who are best equipped to tackle and confront and argue against extremist or hateful ideologies that are peddled in the Muslim community, just as those ideologies are peddled in other communities as well.
Now, this whole thing on this debate on values has been kicked off because of the so-called Trojan Horse saga. The publication of the Ofsted reports in Birmingham schools, you've stated yourself that all schools should be required, you said, to follow a core curriculum. You suggested that staff at academies and free schools are currently not required to have formal teaching qualifications and that they enjoy a broad control over their curriculum, a policy you said that needs to be dramatically changed, and which I think you've pledged in your next manifesto for 2015 to change. Even some of your Conservative Party colleagues in the coalition government have expressed some disquiet over what they describe as your intention to roll back school freedoms. Are those concerns justified?
No, I think the Conservatives and Michael Gove are just plainly wrong on this, and I'm frustrated that they have stopped me from introducing a very sensible measure which simply says that teachers in our classrooms, and regardless of what label there is, what nameplate there is at the school gates. I don't care whether it's an academy or a free school or a maintained school, faith school, non-faith school. I think every parent is entitled to expect that the teachers who are teaching their sons and daughters are properly qualified, or at least seeking proper qualification. And secondly, I think we should equally entitle parents to expect that there is a core body of knowledge, a core curriculum, if you like, which is imparted by teachers to their sons and daughters, again, regardless of what school they're in. What's the logic in saying, which appears to be the approach of the Conservatives and Michael Gove, to say, well, here's a curriculum which should be taught in this school, but it doesn't need to be taught in that school. I think most parents like the diversity in the school system, as do I, who like the idea that there is greater freedom for head teachers to organise the school day and so on, but also want a parental guarantee, if you like, that there is a core body of knowledge, which, by the way, because it's a core body of knowledge, will reflect and derive from some core British values, which are then, imparted in all classrooms across the country. And I think that was what Sir Michael Wilshaw said in one of his recommendations following Ofsted's report into the schools in Birmingham. And it is a source of great frustration to me that those sensible changes of giving parents that reassurance, that guarantee that their kids will be taught by qualified teachers or by teachers who are seeking qualification, and they'll all be given a core body of knowledge, regardless of where they're being schooled. It's frustrating to me that the Conservatives have blocked that reform. I think it would be a good reform, and I don't think in any way it is inconsistent with making sure there is diversity and freedom in the school system.
Some of your Conservative Party partners, colleagues, suggesting that you've got a bit of double talk on this issue. They've said that the Liberal Democrats helped us massively extend academic freedoms by voting for the Academies Act in 2010. And I'm quoting one, it's thanks to the votes of Liberal Democrat MPs that 4,000 schools now have the freedom to set their own curriculum, compared to just 203 schools 4 years ago. Does that latest announcement of yours represent what some have said is another U-turn as policy, in respect of the university school fees, which I know dogged you post the last election?
Not at all. I've been consistent on this throughout. Look, it's a very one-eyed view of school autonomy for the Conservatives to claim that school autonomy means anarchy. School freedom doesn't mean anarchy. I want head teachers to have more say about how they run their schools rather than constantly be at the beck and call of government ministers. But do remember, if you really want to know what is inconsistent in this debate, is that Conservative ministers, Michael Gove, spent months personally seeking to rewrite the details of various bits of the curriculum. And having done all of that, they then say, oh, by the way, it doesn't need to be taught in great swathes of the school system. Well, why on earth put all that effort into getting the school curriculum right in the first place? If the school curriculum is right for one school, why is it not right for another? And I really do think we've got to get away from this rather ideological approach to education, which says that school freedom equals sort of, total free-for-all, total anarchy. It doesn't. It means, yes, give head teachers the professional discretion and authority to run schools in the way that they think is best for their school and their pupils, but at the same time make sure that parents have the guarantee that their sons and daughters will be taught by qualified teachers and will be taught the same body of knowledge, core body of knowledge, as much as any other child anywhere else in the country.
Now back to the Birmingham issue, which is still one that's right at the heart of media conversation at the moment. Our own research indicates that the overwhelming majority of parents and children involved in those schools which were designated or targeted in Birmingham have been experiencing a sense of being under siege over the last few weeks and months. And this is particularly pertinent as it's been a period where young children have been taking their GCSE exams. And they say they've been hounded by an overzealous and sensationalist media, as well as politicians keen to exploit fears of a sort of Islamist takeover. Senior educationists, community leaders and local members of Parliament in Birmingham today issued a press release announcing the formation of a new campaign group putting Birmingham school kids first. They'll be meeting this afternoon. They stated their aims are firstly to ensure any issues of governance within Birmingham schools are fixed and fixed fast. Secondly, to challenge the false and divisive allegation that this is a problem of systematic radicalisation, extremism or terrorism. They say the central allegation that there was an organised plot to radicalise school children in a handful of Birmingham schools remains unproven. Now, do you think they have serious, genuine, valid concerns?
Well, I certainly accept that it is important throughout all of this that we don't forget that there are children who deserve and have every right to get a decent education, even as these schools are in the eye of a media storm and all the scrutiny and frenzy, if you like, that comes with that. And I'm very anxious that we should all work together in order to ensure that, notwithstanding the debate, the polemic, the toing and froing of all of this, the children's education is still protected and they get the education they deserve. I think it's not for me to adjudicate on this claim and counterclaim between people who say that there was nothing untoward in the schools and the reports by Sir Michael Wilshaw and others who said there was something untoward. All I do know is schools are places of education. They should not be places of indoctrination. No parent wants that. Whether you're a Muslim or not a Muslim, whether your children go to a faith school or a secular school, the schools are there to provide an education, and I think it's perfectly normal and reasonable that the inspectorate, Ofsted, has a right to go to these schools and say, without fear or favour, if they feel that something has toppled the wrong side of that line, to say, no, hang on, that's not right, and to point for improvements to governance and so on. But we have to make sure that legitimate role of Ofsted is done in a way that is proportionate, is evidence-based, and doesn't engulf the parents and the children in a way which stops or disrupts their education. And I'm sure Sir Michael Wilshaw will be the first to acknowledge that. And I know he has been open to listening to the criticisms from the school community in Birmingham and has said he will review himself, quite rightly, about how, what the conduct of Ofsted itself was. But let's remember, at the end of the day, we all have one common objective, which is to provide a decent education to our children, regardless of what schools they go to.
I think most parents at all those schools that have been at the centre of this controversy are not going to disagree with you, especially when you talk about evidence-based and also to ensure that the school doesn't face any disruption. But I think it's true to say, I think most senior media outlets at least acknowledge that there was, to use a quote at the time, no smoking gun. There was no evidence to show there were indoctrination taking place in these schools. Perhaps there were some governance issues. That's what they've said. So why do you think it is that there's been this obsession and continued obsession with talking about British values?
Well, that's a slightly different matter. But look, I'm not going to seek to, and I don't think anyone should, seek to rewrite the Ofsted report. It's there. It had a set of clear recommendations, one of which, as I say, I strongly agree with, which is there should be a core body of knowledge provided, imparted, taught to all children across the school system, which my Conservative coalition partners appear to be blocking. I think we should be led by the evidence, and that is a very good example of where I think we should be led by the evidence and not sort of rule things out of court. On the issue about British values, look, I feel so strongly that one of the things that makes our country great is our ability to treat each other with tolerance and with mutual respect. And yes, to have different religious identities, yes, to have different ethnic identities, but also to be united by a common pride in being British. And that is what I think can be endangered when you get a highly polarised, angry debate that risks, and I wouldn't put it any stronger than that risks giving the impression that a whole community is being caricatured in a particular way. And that is unfair. It is deeply unfair on those many, many British Muslims who have every right to say that they are as British as anybody else. And it is those people I want to stand up for. It is those people I want to appeal to. It is those people I want to say, do not be fearful. You have every right to assert your views and your identity in modern Britain as anybody else. And in fact, you play a particularly important role in making sure that the values of moderation and tolerance are upheld in all of our communities across the country.
Finally, I just want to ask you, there's been suggestions that the remit and findings of the Extremism Task Force, which was formed in the wake of the Woolwich killings last year, have very much been framing this whole debate over schools, madrasas, Islamic societies, universities, and amongst the community. It's why do you believe that insufficient engagement was made between the task force panel and the Muslim community, that perhaps the wrong advice were being sought, and that no recognition of the counter-terrorism threat or the terrorism threat from far-right organisations seemed to infiltrate the task force at all. Do you think that when Baroness Neville-Jones said to us several years ago that she was intent on ensuring that the government did not look at the Muslim community through the prism of security and counter-terrorism, that has now been shelved?
I don't think that's a fair characterisation of the Extremism Task Force. I am aware that that is what some people say, and that is the perception amongst some. As it happens, the last meeting of the Extremism Task Force looked explicitly at the problem of anti-Muslim extremism. We have taken significant and aggressive steps, for instance, to deal with the extremism of movements like the EDL. And I'm always clear, and I've always been very clear, that violent extremism is something that unfortunately rears its ugly head in different contexts, in different communities, and is not only attached to parts of the Muslim community. Absolutely not. And that is not the way in which we organised our work at the Extremism Task Force. The only other thing I would say is just how these things work. The Extremism Task Force was not a sort of roadshow which went around the country, if you like. That's what we do anyway, and that's what I do as a politician constantly. I'm constantly making myself accessible and available. And I have lots of contacts on a weekly basis, on an ongoing basis, with different groups in the Muslim community, with different individual members of the Muslim community, in my own patch in Sheffield and elsewhere. The Extremism Task Force was a set of meetings within Whitehall, which considered broad evidence from a range of sources, but absolutely not was it a task force that only looked at one form of extremism. It is, as the name implied, it has looked diligently at all forms of extremism. Right
Honourable Nick Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us again on Islam Channel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.